Can you hear the tiny squeak of Little Mole's cart? Its rhythm circles like the sound of a sparrow saying, I see you, over and over. Little Mole sang the words above the parroting of his wheel. Between the edge of the great green lawn and the border of the afternoon, Little Mole sank into the long dark tunnels of his best friend Petrie. There was barely a sound except for the echoing of, I see you, I see you, I see you, bouncing against the damp walls. Petrie had spent the whole morning arranging and rearranging for the arrival of his best friend. He brought out his finest pillows, his pile of books, and a silver cup for the flour that Little Mole would always bring on each visit. When Little Mole arrived, they spoke about the cooler weather, about lawns, and how enjoyable light dusting can be. As with every visit, they soon sat down while Petrie started to read softly from the pages of a small green book. People have 10 to 40 moles, and they can fade away and even change shape. It is important to know that a mole and a Little Mole leaned forward. Go on, please. Little Mole. Yes, Pet. I need your help. Come and sit next to me. Petrie turned the book to Little Mole. I cannot see this word. It is blurry. Can you read it for me, please? Pet, I can see it, but I don't know how to read. Petrie patted the head of his friend, and they both sat in silence, enjoying the scent of the beautiful flower. The next week, Petrie spent the whole morning arranging and rearranging for the arrival of his best friend. He brought out his finest 2 pillows and a silver cup for the bright flower that Little Mole would bring on each visit, but no book. When Little Mole arrived, they placed the flowers in the silver cup and sat in silence. Little Mole, can I ask you something? Yes, Pet. Do you ever feel sad? Little Mole shook his head from side to side. No, I don't think so. No. They both sat very still, and Little Mole's whiskers began to shake just a little bit. Pet, he said, looking to the eyes of his friend. Yes, Little Mole. It's not true what I said. Sometimes I do feel sad. Petrie patted the head of his friend and sighed. Little Mole stayed for a bit, then abruptly left, knowing exactly what he must do. Early the next morning, Little Mole tied together his beloved toothbrushes and pulled them across green lawns and tall fields to the busy streets where a mole could make a fair trade. Little Mole, after some time, found a shop window full of eyeglasses and chipped dishes. He untied his toothbrushes and walked through the door to a slow mole behind a dirty glass counter. Hi, I'm Mo. How can I help? I'd like to trade these in for a pair of your best eyeglasses, please. Mo looked at the green brush, then the purple one. I'll take the purple one, but why would I need 2 of them? What can I get in return? The slow mole waddled back into the back room and brought out a pair of old glasses held together with yellowing tape. Try these on. Thank you, sir. Now can you see me? I see you, Little Mole said, and left with his only toothbrush and a pair of broken eyeglasses. The next week, Petrie was slouching on an old chair when Little Mole arrived. There was no silver cup, there were no fine pillows, and no books. Pet, I brought you something. You shouldn't have. Please, fetch a book. Petrie, slightly confused, left for a moment and returned with a small green book. Little Mole let his friend settle back into his chair and handed him the eyeglasses. These are for you, Pet. Little Mole leaned forward as Petrie placed the glasses on his nose and opened the book. Go on, Pet. Petrie looked down at Little Mole as his whiskers began to shake just a little bit. I'm so sorry. These don't really work. It's all still very blurry. They both sat in silence, with neither bothering to mention that Little Mole forgot to bring a flower. Little Mole went through everything he owned and knew with his heart that his black leather boot was both precious and priceless, and set out in the morning through green lawns and tall fields. Little Mole entered the shop as the slow mole looked up from his book. I'd like to trade these in for your finest pair of glasses. The slow mole put the book down and inspected the boot. Well, what am I going to do with one shoe? I'm so sorry, I can't make a trade. The slow mole felt bad, so he let Little Mole pick any book he chose to take home. When he got home, Little Mole opened the book and noticed that it did not seem to be the same language as in Petrie's books. The lines and marks were so pleasing that it seemed to make some sort of sense. That night, he began to teach himself to read, and day after day and night after night, he fell into the spell of those black marks on the yellow paper and forgot to visit his friend Petrie. Petrie became worried when Little Mole stopped visiting, and early one morning set out across yellow fields and green lawns to the hill where his friend lived. Much to his surprise, he found Little Mole sitting outside with a yellow book by his side. They spoke about the warmer but rainier weather, about lawns, and the merits of exercise. They both sat down in the sun, and Little Mole opened up the book and began to hum the most beautiful song that Petrie had ever heard. When the song came to its end, they both sat in silence. Then Petrie gave his friend a pat on his head and said, "Go on. Again, please."
Once upon a time, 344 years, 5 months, and a day ago to be exact, a man named Spinoza sat down over a fire and made a pair of magic spectacles. The frames were wire and the glass was clear, and they looked like nothing special, as is often the way with magical things. But they were extraordinary, for they allowed the wearer to see into the hearts of those around them. This was, to be frank, both extremely delightful and extremely disconcerting, as the glasses caused several marriages and 2 medium-sized wars before they vanished. But they were not lost. They were stolen by an elderly aunt who had had enough of the havoc they were wreaking, and were passed down her family from most sensible person to most sensible person. Andrew Christensen was not the most sensible person in the family. He was 12, small for his age, prone to daydream and evening dream and night dream. He spent all his time imagining impossible possibilities and trying to invent new colors from his box of paints. It was important that the glasses, which currently belonged to his uncle Mervin, who lived alone in a house painted brown, went to the person with the least imagination. It was the only way they stayed out of trouble. But now, there the glasses were, perched on Mervin's seat at the theater in London. He had taken Andrew to the pantomime, and he had gone to buy ice cream, vanilla, because chocolate was too unsettling, and the glasses lay unguarded. Andrew's fingers twitched. He couldn't stop himself. He picked them up as delicately as if they were alive and put them on. Immediately, the worlds blurred, and there, in place of people's faces, were their hearts. To look at each person was like walking into a room. Andy wasn't sure what he'd been expecting, but not that. It knocked the breath clean out of him. He began carefully, slowly, to edge along his row. One elegant woman had a heart like a room in a museum, with all the failings of her friends carefully preserved in plaster and kept in neatly labeled rows. One heart looked like a great pillared building, with vast windows through which poured light, and flying through it, a cascade of birds of every color. In another heart there was meat. Nothing but piles of meat. Andrew, startled, took off the glasses and saw the famous face of a man who owned a billion-pound airline. The man frowned and blew his nose at Andrew until he moved on. Another heart was full of needles and roses. Another full of shooting stars, ricocheting off the walls of a simple plain bedroom. 2 people, one in seat D5, one in seat D9, had hearts that were righteously passionate about kitchen appliances. Some people went mad for a good toaster, it turned out. At the end of the row was a little girl's heart, a gorgeous tumult of grass and wind and galloping horses. Andrew came to the end of the row, gasping to catch his breath. This, then, was what Uncle Mervin had been able to see. The wild wonder of it. Surely, he thought, surely, everyone should have a chance to see it. To see how strange we are. Even the most normal-looking of us, even people who had serious haircuts and carefully unemotional shoes, were deeply, magnificently peculiar. Then, a sudden hand descended on his shoulder, and he leapt half out of his shoes. "Andy, lad," said Uncle Mervin's voice, "is there something you want to explain?" Andy whipped around, the glasses still on his nose, and he gasped. Uncle Mervin's heart was a vast artist studio, and the walls were colored every possible color. Colors both imaginable and unimaginable. At the center of it, there were 2 portraits, a woman, who Andrew had never seen before, and Andrew's own face. Andrew snatched the glasses off and stared up at his uncle. For the first time, he saw the laughter lines around his uncle's eyes and the sardonic hook to his eyebrows. Before he could stop himself, he burst out, "But I thought you were the sensible one." Mervin did not, surprisingly, seem annoyed. Maybe I started out that way," he said, "when your great-aunt Bet gave me these specs. But not anymore, lad. Not after what I've seen." Andy did not waste time apologizing and explaining. That could come later. "Everyone should see it, Uncle Mervin. Just for one day. Just for an hour, even a minute." There was a smile twitching at the corner of Mervin's mouth. "I've been thinking the same thing these last few years. What if every person got just one day, when we could see it all? The marvels and darknesses and joys in people's hearts. It would be a miracle of a thing, lad. Why do you think I left them on the chair for you to see?" "What? You did it on The thing is, Andy, they can cause a fair amount of mayhem, those specs. Not if everyone passed them on and didn't hoard them. Not if you wore them once and let them go. They should belong to everyone." Mervin opened his mouth and closed it again. Without another word, they edged their way out through the crowd of people returning to their seats for the second half and out into the frosty city night. They stopped in a quiet park. Mervin took out his penknife, and in microscopic handwriting, he scratched on the earpiece of the spectacles, "Wear me once and pass me on." "Is that going to be enough to persuade people?" said Andy. So Mervin added, in even neater letters, and on the other ear, "Or I will come and reclaim them, and you won't like that." "I'll know where they are, I reckon," he said. "After so long in their company, we've got a link, the two of us. I'll keep an eye on them." They set the glasses down on a park bench and walked away. Neither looked back. Mervin fished out the 2 pantomime ice creams. They had melted, but they were surprisingly delicious. A kind of vanilla soup. The ice cream reminded Andy of something important. He caught at Mervin's brown sleeve. "Can we go back to the pantomime?" "Aye, if you want, but it'll be over soon." "I know," said Andy, "but I want to introduce the people in D5 and D9. The spectacles have been on the move now for several months. They have caused more than one marriage and a great deal of wonder. Several ruined pairs of trousers where people have had to sit down in astonishment on the pavement. And, as yet, no wars. Keep an eye out, because they might come to you. Wear them once and pass them on."